She thought she was kicking out a nobody, but she had no idea she had just humiliated the woman who could erase her entire career in a single phone call. The boutique glowed under warm chandelier light, polished marble floors reflecting rows of designer heels that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and the faint scent of expensive perfume lingered in the air like a quiet declaration of status. When Clara Whitmore stepped inside, the contrast was immediate and unforgiving. Her coat was simple, slightly worn at the sleeves, her shoes practical and scuffed from real sidewalks, not polished showrooms, and yet her posture remained steady, her gaze calm, as if she belonged somewhere far more important than this room. A sales associate glanced at her, then quickly looked away, whispering something under her breath to a colleague. Another staff member adjusted a display without acknowledging her presence, the silence around Clara growing heavier with each passing second. It wasn't loud rejection, not yet, but it was precise, practiced, the kind that made a person feel invisible before a single word was spoken. Clara moved slowly toward a rack of dresses, her fingers brushing the fabric with quiet appreciation, as though she saw something beyond the price tags, beyond the judgment. Across the room, Vanessa Cole watched with a tightening smile, her heels clicking sharply against the floor as she approached, each step echoing like a warning. She stopped just short of Clara, her eyes scanning her from head to toe, calculating, dismissing. "Can I help you?" she asked, though her tone made it clear help was not what she intended to offer. Clara looked up, her expression composed, almost gentle. "I was hoping to try this one," she said, lifting a dress slightly from the rack. Vanessa's smile thinned. "That piece is part of our premium collection," she replied, her voice cool and measured, loud enough for nearby customers to overhear. "It's not something we usually recommend." The air shifted. A couple browsing nearby slowed their movement, sensing the tension, watching without pretending not to. Clara didn't react the way Vanessa expected. No embarrassment, no flustered apology. Just a quiet stillness, her hand still resting on the fabric. "I understand," she said softly. "I'd still like to see it." Vanessa let out a small laugh, the kind that wasn't meant to be kind. "Ma'am, this boutique caters to a certain clientele," she said, her words carefully chosen, polished, but unmistakably sharp. "Perhaps there are other stores that would be a better fit." For a moment, nothing moved. The lights hummed faintly overhead. A glass display case caught a reflection of Clara's face, steady and unreadable. And then, with a subtle motion, Clara released the dress. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She simply nodded once, as if confirming something only she understood. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, waiting, as though the room itself sensed that something had just shifted beneath the surface. And as Clara turned toward the exit, her footsteps soft against the marble, no one there realized they weren't watching someone leave. They were watching the beginning of their own undoing. The glass door closed behind Clara with a soft click, but the sound seemed to linger longer than it should have, echoing faintly against the polished walls inside, as if the space itself was marking the moment. Outside, the late afternoon light stretched across the sidewalk, casting long shadows that softened the sharp edges of the city, and for a brief second, Clara stood still just beyond the threshold, her reflection faintly visible in the boutique window. Inside, Vanessa exhaled, a small satisfied breath, already turning away as if the situation had resolved itself exactly as expected. "Some people really do not understand where they belong," she muttered under her breath, straightening a display of handbags that cost more than a year of someone else's hard work. A nearby associate gave a quiet nod, half amused, half relieved that the tension had passed without escalating. The other customers resumed their browsing, though a subtle shift remained in the air, like the aftertaste of something slightly bitter. But outside, Clara did not hurry. She adjusted the sleeve of her coat, her movements unhurried, deliberate, as if time bent differently around her. Her eyes lifted once more to the boutique sign, not with anger, not even with disappointment, but with a quiet recognition, as though she had seen this moment before in a different place, under different lights. Then, with calm precision, she reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. There was no hesitation as she dialed, no searching through contacts, just a direct, familiar motion. The line rang once, twice, then a voice answered on the other end, low and steady. Clara did not raise her voice, did not rush her words. "It happened again," she said. That was all. No explanation. No complaint. Just a statement that carried more weight than it appeared. On the other end, there was a pause, not of confusion, but of understanding. Somewhere miles away, in a corner office high above the city where glass walls overlooked an endless skyline, Daniel Whitmore stood beside a long conference table, a room filled with executives waiting mid-discussion. He had been listening to projections, numbers, strategies that moved markets, but the moment he heard her voice, everything else became irrelevant. He turned slightly away from the room, his expression shifting, not into anger, but into something colder, more controlled. "Where are you?" he asked. Clara gave the name of the boutique, her tone unchanged. Another pause followed, shorter this time. "I will take care of it," Daniel said. There was no need for further words. The call ended. Back on the sidewalk, Clara lowered her phone and slipped it back into her bag, her face as composed as before, as if nothing had happened at all. She did not look back again. Instead, she began to walk, her steps measured, blending into the rhythm of the city, unnoticed by those rushing past her. Inside the boutique, Vanessa laughed lightly at something a customer said, completely unaware that, at that exact moment, a decision had already been made far beyond her reach, one that would not arrive with noise or warning, but with a quiet certainty that would leave no room for denial. And somewhere between that silent phone call and the ticking of the next hour, the balance of power had already begun to shift. Back inside the boutique, the rhythm of the room returned to its carefully curated normal, but something subtle had shifted beneath the surface, like a faint crack hidden beneath polished marble. Vanessa moved with renewed confidence, her posture sharper, her voice slightly louder as she greeted new customers, as if asserting control over a moment she believed she had handled perfectly. "Let me know if you need anything," she said with a polished smile, though her eyes occasionally flicked toward the glass doors, just for a fraction of a second, before quickly looking away. One of the junior associates leaned closer to another and whispered, "Do you think that was necessary?" The other shrugged lightly, lowering her voice. "Vanessa knows what she is doing. This place has standards." The words hung in the air, quiet but firm, reinforcing the invisible line that had just been drawn. Across the boutique, a woman in a tailored coat examined a handbag, her expression thoughtful, but her attention drifted toward the entrance, as if replaying what she had witnessed moments earlier. There had been something about Clara's stillness, something that did not match the way people usually reacted when they were dismissed. It was not embarrassment. It was not defeat. It was something else entirely, something harder to define, and for reasons she could not explain, it left a faint unease in her chest. Vanessa, however, dismissed any lingering doubt. She adjusted a display mirror, smoothing her hair, her reflection sharp and confident under the warm lighting. "We cannot allow just anyone to walk in and pretend," she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. "It affects the brand." Her heels clicked with certainty as she moved behind the counter, checking inventory on a sleek tablet, each tap precise, controlled, reinforcing her sense of authority. Minutes passed, then more, the steady hum of quiet conversations and soft music filling the space again, the earlier tension dissolving into the background like it had never existed. Yet outside, the city moved differently. Traffic lights changed, footsteps echoed, and somewhere beyond the immediate block, decisions were already in motion, invisible but inevitable. Inside, a phone at the back office desk lit up briefly with a notification, then another, small signals that went unnoticed in the flow of routine. Vanessa did not see it. She was busy assisting a new customer, her voice warm now, attentive, the perfect image of professionalism. "This one just came in last week," she said, presenting a dress with practiced elegance. "It is one of our most exclusive pieces." The customer smiled, but her eyes flickered once more toward the door, as if expecting something, though she could not say what. Time stretched, not long enough to raise alarm, but long enough to build something unseen. And in that carefully controlled environment, where every detail was designed to project perfection, no one realized that the most important detail had already slipped beyond their control, set into motion by a woman who had said almost nothing at all, and by a decision made. Far away, in a room where power did not need to raise its voice to be understood. The minutes moved quietly, almost politely, as if nothing significant could possibly happen in a place so carefully controlled. Yet beneath the calm, something unseen continued to gather momentum. In the back office, the phone lit up again, this time with a call that did not stop ringing. One of the junior associates hesitated before stepping in, glancing toward Vanessa, who was still on the sales floor, then finally picking up. "Hello, this is Cole Boutique," she said, her voice slightly uncertain. A pause followed, and her expression shifted almost instantly. Yes, she is here," she answered, her tone tightening as she straightened unconsciously. "One moment, please." She stepped out onto the floor, her eyes searching for Vanessa, a subtle urgency now in her movements. "Vanessa," she called softly, trying not to disrupt the customers. "There is a call for you." It sounds important." Vanessa frowned slightly, annoyance flickering across her face at the interruption, but she handed the dress back to the customer with a practiced smile. "Excuse me for just a moment," she said smoothly before turning and walking toward the back. Her heels echoed with controlled precision, but there was a faint edge now, something sharper than before. She took the phone, her tone immediately professional. "This is Vanessa Cole speaking." On the other end, the voice was calm, measured, and unmistakably authoritative. It did not introduce itself with unnecessary detail, nor did it raise its volume. It simply spoke with the kind of certainty that did not require explanation. Vanessa's posture shifted almost imperceptibly as she listened, her confident expression tightening just slightly. I am not sure I understand," she replied carefully, though a hint of defensiveness slipped into her voice. Another pause. Then the voice continued, still calm, still controlled, but now leaving no room for misinterpretation. Vanessa's fingers tightened around the receiver. The color in her face changed, not dramatically, but enough that the associate nearby noticed and went very still. "That situation was handled according to store policy," Vanessa said, choosing each word with care, though the certainty she had earlier now felt less solid, less anchored. The response on the other end was immediate, precise, and final. There was no argument, no raised tone, just a statement that carried weight far beyond the small office walls. Vanessa's lips parted slightly, but no words came out at first. For the first time that day, she did not seem fully in control of the conversation. I was not aware," she said, her voice quieter now, the sharp edge replaced with something closer to uncertainty. The call ended not with a goodbye, but with a simple conclusion that did not invite further discussion. Vanessa lowered the phone slowly, her reflection faintly visible in the dark screen. For a moment, she stood completely still, the silence in the room heavier than before. Outside, the boutique continued as if untouched, soft music playing, customers browsing, sunlight shifting across the glass displays. But something had changed. When Vanessa stepped back onto the floor, her posture was no longer as rigid, her confidence no longer as effortless. She glanced toward the entrance without meaning to, her eyes lingering there just a second too long. And though nothing had arrived yet, though no dramatic entrance had been made, the atmosphere had already begun to tighten, as if the room itself was preparing for something inevitable, something that would not be loud, but would be impossible to ignore when it finally came. The air inside the boutique no longer felt as effortless as it had an hour earlier, even if no one could quite explain why. Conversations were quieter now, laughter softer, as though an invisible pressure had settled over the room, subtle but undeniable. Vanessa moved through the space with measured control, but her earlier confidence had thinned into something more cautious, more deliberate. She adjusted a display that did not need adjusting, smoothed a fabric that was already perfect, her hands searching for small tasks to anchor herself. Every few seconds, her gaze drifted toward the glass entrance, then quickly away, as if acknowledging it for too long might confirm something she was not ready to face. The junior associate from earlier watched her from a distance, sensing the shift but not understanding its cause. "Is everything okay?" she asked quietly when Vanessa passed by. Vanessa forced a brief smile, one that did not quite reach her eyes. "Of course," she replied, her tone light but controlled. "Just stay focused." The words sounded routine, but the rhythm behind them was different, slightly off, like a note played just out of tune. Outside, the late afternoon light had softened into early evening, and the reflections on the boutique windows deepened, turning the glass into a mirror that blurred the line between inside and out. A few customers began to gather near the entrance, their attention drawn not by anything dramatic, but by something subtle, a quiet shift in the street. The low hum of an engine approached, smooth and steady, unlike the usual stop-and-go rhythm of traffic. It was not loud, not attention-seeking, but it carried a presence that made people look without knowing why. Vanessa noticed the change in movement near the door and turned slightly, her eyes narrowing just a fraction. Through the glass, a sleek black Rolls-Royce glided to a stop at the curb, its polished surface reflecting the city lights like liquid metal. For a moment, no one inside spoke. The boutique, so carefully curated for control and elegance, seemed to pause, as if recognizing something beyond its own walls. The driver stepped out first, moving with quiet precision, then walked to the rear door and opened it without hurry. Vanessa's breath caught, almost imperceptibly, though she could not yet explain why. A man stepped out, his presence immediate but understated, dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of power without needing to announce it. Daniel Whitmore did not rush. He adjusted his cuffs slightly, his expression calm, composed, as his eyes lifted toward the boutique entrance. There was no anger in his face, no visible urgency, only a quiet certainty that made the space around him feel smaller, more contained. Inside, the customers near the door instinctively stepped aside, creating a path without being asked. The junior associate whispered under her breath, "Who is that?" But no one answered. Vanessa stood frozen for just a second too long, her earlier words echoing faintly in her mind. The certainty she once felt now unraveling thread by thread. The door opened with a soft chime, the same gentle sound as before, but this time it did not feel ordinary. Daniel stepped inside, his shoes meeting the marble floor with a quiet, deliberate rhythm. And in that moment, the room did not need an announcement to understand that something irreversible had just arrived. Daniel Whitmore did not need to raise his voice or quicken his pace for the room to understand that everything had just changed. His presence alone shifted the atmosphere, like a quiet force pressing down on every polished surface, every carefully arranged display, every controlled expression. The soft music that had been playing moments earlier now felt distant, almost irrelevant, as if it belonged to a different time. He walked forward with measured steps, his gaze steady, not scanning the room in curiosity, but moving with purpose, as though he already knew exactly where he needed to go. The employees near the entrance instinctively stepped aside, their earlier composure replaced with uncertainty, their eyes following him without daring to speak. Vanessa stood behind the counter, her posture rigid, her mind racing to make sense of what she was seeing, of what she had already been told on that call just minutes ago. When Daniel's eyes met hers, it was not a dramatic moment, not loud, not confrontational, but something far more unsettling. He did not look at her with anger. He looked at her with clarity. "You are Vanessa Cole," he said, his voice calm, even, leaving no room for denial. It was not a question. Vanessa swallowed, forcing herself to step forward, her training pushing her to maintain composure. "Yes, sir," she replied, her tone carefully controlled, though the confidence she had worn earlier was now fragile, barely holding together. Daniel nodded once, a small, precise movement. "I understand there was an incident here earlier today," he continued, his voice steady, each word deliberate, as if placed exactly where it needed to be. Vanessa's fingers tightened slightly at her sides. "There was a situation, yes," she said, choosing her words carefully, trying to regain control of the narrative. "A woman who did not meet our store's standards attempted to access restricted merchandise." The moment the words left her mouth, the room seemed to still even further. One of the associates lowered her gaze. A customer near the display table stopped moving entirely. Daniel did not interrupt her. He let the sentence settle, let it exist fully in the space between them. Then, after a brief pause, he spoke again, quieter this time, but somehow carrying more weight. "That woman," he said, "is my wife." The words did not echo, but they did not need to. They landed with a precision that silenced everything else. Vanessa's expression froze, not dramatically, not with visible panic, but with a subtle fracture that spread through her composure in real time. For a second, she seemed unable to respond, her mind searching for something to correct, something to deny, but finding nothing. Around them, the room held its breath. Daniel took one step closer, not invading, not threatening, simply closing the distance enough to make the truth undeniable. Clara Whitmore, he added, his voice unchanged, is not someone you evaluate. The sentence was simple, but it carried a finality that could not be negotiated. Vanessa's lips parted slightly, but no words came. The certainty she had relied on earlier, the belief that she understood who belonged and who did not, dissolved quietly in front of everyone watching. And in that moment, without a single raised voice or dramatic gesture, the balance of power that once favored her had completely and irreversibly shifted. For a moment, no one moved, as if the entire boutique had been suspended in place, caught between what had just been said and what it meant. Vanessa felt the weight of every eye in the room without needing to look, the silence pressing in around her more suffocating than any accusation could have been. She tried to gather herself, to rebuild the confidence that had once come so easily, but the words she had spoken earlier echoed too clearly, too publicly to be undone. I was not aware, she finally managed, her voice lower now, stripped of its earlier sharpness, each word carefully chosen as if stepping across fragile ground. Daniel regarded her for a brief second, not with impatience, but with a calm that made excuses feel irrelevant. That is precisely the problem, he replied, his tone unchanged, not louder, not harsher, but final in a way that left no space for negotiation. He turned slightly, his gaze moving across the boutique, taking in the displays, the staff, the customers who now stood quietly observing, their earlier curiosity replaced with a deeper understanding of what was unfolding. This location operates under Whitmore Holdings, he continued, his voice steady, carrying just enough for the room to hear without ever needing to rise. A faint shift rippled through the staff. One associate's eyes widened, another instinctively straightened, as the name settled into place with unmistakable clarity. Vanessa's composure cracked just enough to be seen now, her shoulders tightening as realization fully arrived. Daniel did not rush the moment. He allowed it to unfold, to settle into every corner of the space. We invest in brands that understand discretion, respect, and judgment, he said, his words measured, deliberate, each one landing with quiet precision. Not assumptions. Vanessa opened her mouth slightly, as if to respond, to defend her decision, but the reasoning that once felt solid now seemed hollow, insufficient even before it could be spoken. Around her, the atmosphere had changed completely. The same room that had supported her authority less than an hour ago now felt distant, unfamiliar, as though it no longer recognized her position within it. Daniel took a slow breath, then gave a small nod, as if confirming a decision that had already been made long before he walked through the door. Effective immediately, he said, his voice calm. You are relieved of your position. The words were not dramatic, not delivered with force, but their impact was absolute. Vanessa stood still, her expression frozen in a way that no longer concealed anything, the reality settling in without resistance. No one spoke. No one moved. The boutique, once filled with quiet luxury and controlled energy, now held a different kind of silence, one that carried consequence. Daniel did not look back at her again. Instead, he turned slightly toward the entrance, as if the moment did not require further attention, as if justice, once delivered, did not need to linger. And in that stillness, with no raised voices, no spectacle, the lesson unfolded with undeniable clarity, not through what was said, but through what could no longer be undone. The silence did not break immediately after the decision was spoken. It deepened, settling into the walls, the glass, the polished marble floor, as if the entire space needed a moment to absorb what had just occurred. Vanessa remained where she stood, no longer at the center of authority, but suspended in a reality she had not prepared for, her reflection faint in the nearby mirror, a version of herself that looked unfamiliar even to her. No one rushed to comfort her, no one stepped forward to question what had been decided. The structure of the room had already shifted, and everyone inside could feel it. Daniel adjusted his cuff once more, a small, habitual motion, then turned his attention briefly toward the staff, his gaze steady but not unkind. "This brand represents more than product," he said calmly, his voice carrying just enough to reach every corner. Without force, "it represents how people are treated when no one thinks it matters." The words did not accuse, yet they lingered with weight, settling into the awareness of every employee standing there. The junior associate lowered her eyes, her earlier uncertainty now replaced with quiet understanding, while another employee subtly straightened, as if recalibrating something internal. Daniel did not wait for acknowledgement. He did not need agreement spoken aloud. The silence itself was enough. Outside, the evening light had softened further, casting a gentle glow through the boutique windows, turning the interior into a scene that felt almost removed from time. Then, without announcement, the glass door opened again with that same soft chime, but this time it carried a different meaning. Clara stepped back inside. Her presence was as quiet as before, her expression unchanged, calm, composed, as if the events that had unfolded were simply a continuation of something she already understood. Conversation stopped instantly, not out of instruction, but out of instinct. Every eye turned toward her, not with judgment now, but with a kind of attention that bordered on respect. Daniel's gaze softened just slightly as he looked at her, the only visible shift in his otherwise controlled demeanor. He did not speak her name, did not call attention to her return. He simply stepped aside, creating space, a gesture that said more than words could. Clara walked forward at her own pace, her steps light against the marble, her eyes moving briefly across the displays she had been denied earlier. She did not look at Vanessa. She did not need to. The moment had already spoken for itself. One of the associates, the same one who had remained silent before, took a hesitant step forward. "Would you like to see the dress?" she asked softly, her tone careful, respectful, entirely different from before. Clara paused, considering for a brief second, then gave a small nod. "Yes," she replied simply. The associate moved quickly, but not nervously, retrieving the dress with a care that reflected something newly understood. The room remained quiet as Clara accepted it, her fingers brushing the fabric once more, this time without interruption, without doubt. And as she stood there, no longer questioned, no longer dismissed, the space around her seemed to realign, as if the boutique itself was remembering what it should have been from the beginning, a place not defined by who appeared to belong, but by how it chose to see. Clara stood before the mirror as the associate carefully adjusted the dress along her shoulders, the fabric falling into place as if it had always belonged to her, the soft lighting catching every detail with quiet precision. There was no rush in her movements, no need to prove anything, no trace of the tension that had once filled the room. She simply observed her reflection, her expression calm, her eyes steady, as though she had already seen this moment long before anyone else understood its meaning. Around her, the boutique remained silent, but it was no longer the uncomfortable silence of uncertainty. It was something else now, something closer to awareness, the kind that arrives after a truth has been revealed and cannot be ignored. The associate stepped back slightly, giving Clara space, her posture respectful, attentive in a way that felt genuine this time, not rehearsed. "It fits perfectly," she said softly. Clara gave a small nod, her fingers brushing the sleeve once more, then she turned slightly, not to seek approval, but simply to acknowledge the space around her. Daniel stood a few feet away, watching quietly, his presence no longer shifting the room but anchoring it, as though everything had settled into its proper place. He did not interrupt, did not comment. He did not need to. The message had already been delivered. Near the counter, Vanessa remained still, no longer at the center of anything, her earlier certainty replaced by a silence she could not escape. No one looked to her for direction now. No one waited for her approval. The authority she once carried had not been taken with force, but it had been removed with clarity, leaving behind a lesson that did not need to be explained. One of the customers who had witnessed everything slowly returned to browsing, but her movements were different now, more thoughtful, her earlier detachment replaced with quiet reflection. Another glanced toward Clara, not with curiosity, but with a subtle respect that had not existed before. The boutique itself seemed unchanged on the surface, the same displays, the same lighting, the same carefully arranged luxury. Yet something fundamental had shifted beneath it all. Clara stepped away from the mirror after a moment, her decision unspoken but clear. "I will take it," she said simply. The associate nodded, her hands steady as she prepared the purchase, every movement careful, intentional, as though understanding that this moment mattered beyond the transaction itself. Clara did not look toward Vanessa as she passed the counter. She did not need acknowledgement, did not seek apology. Some things did not require words once they had been fully seen. Daniel joined her quietly, his presence calm beside hers, and together they moved toward the exit without hurry. The door opened with that same soft chime, the sound unchanged, yet it carried a different weight now. As they stepped out into the evening light, the boutique remained behind them, still, silent, holding the echo of what had taken place. And inside that silence, without a speech, without a warning, the truth remained clear, not in what was said, but in what everyone now understood, that dignity is not something granted by appearance, and the moment it is denied, it reveals far more about the one who judges than the one who is judged.